Welcome to Our Appalachia. My name is Phil Conn. I'm your host for this series, and we discuss different aspects of the history and culture of Eastern Kentucky on this series. Today we're going to talk about a topic that touches a lot of you here in Morehead and Rowan County. We're going to talk about Rowan County politics, particularly from 1920 through 1960. And we have a gentleman who I've come to know and respect over the last 5 years, who knows Rowan County politics because he's lived Rowan County politics for many, many years. None other than Judge Bill McClain, who has lived in this county for some time. Judge, you were born, though, in Morgan County in the year 1901, you tell me.
Yeah.
So that makes you 80 years old at this point.
80 good ones.
80 good years. So Judge McClain came here after serving in the Navy for about 3 years. You came here in 1923, moved to Farmers, Kentucky, which was a thriving little city at that time, and didn't take you long to get involved in politics, did it, Judge? How did you get involved in politics back in 1923?
Well, I really didn't know what I was supposed to be, a Democrat or Republican. And I got acquainted with a doctor, Tom Passacy Edward Evans. And
was he there in Farmers?
He was in Farmers, and I lived next door to him, and he tutored me up to being a Democrat.
I see.
And we elected him the first 2 terms for county judge.
That was in the 20s?
Yeah.
And at that point in time, you tell me that Rowan County tended to vote Republican.
Big Republican. The precinct that we lived in Farmers, we couldn't hardly get enough Democrats to operate the polls.
So it took a lot of work to get a Democrat elected at that point. So from that time, you have been a Democrat in Rowan County politics and have run for county judge and been elected as a Democrat. Were you instrumental in changing a lot of folks from the Republican Party to the Democrat Party on a permanent basis, or do you find that a lot of Rowan Countyans are really switch voters when it comes to deciding how to go?
Well, I worked hard at it. And I'd say that I've been instrumental in a lot of people voting Democrat ticket that normally would vote Republican if I hadn't been in contact with them.
Now to this day, the western part of Rowan County, not only Farmers, but on up into the little corner that runs with the Licking River, still a lot of Republican votes there. So you had your work cut out in the western part of the county, I guess.
Well, for all the years that I was in politics, the Lower Licking precinct was the heaviest populated Republican precinct in the county by a lot.
Mm-hmm. Now Farmers was a thriving community in the 20s. Of course it still is, but I mean at that time it was a city that was incorporated. You tell me that you were police judge there at one time.
Police judge.
How many years were you police judge in Farmers?
I don't know, 3 or 4 or 5.
And there was a lot of sawmilling there. They were actually floating logs down the Licking River, I understand.
Rafting, they rafted them out of McGoffin and Morgan and Menifee, upper Rowan County. When we get a tide, it was a busy time. They floated logs, rafted ties, floated logs and on rails and loaded cannel coal.
Out of Morgan County?
Out of Menifee, the cannel coal company.
Okay. Menifee had cannel coal and Morgan had some?
Out of McGoffin.
Oh, okay.
Out of McGoffin.
Right.
And they would tie these rails up to the shore on both sides, and when they need them, when they get ready to manufacture them or ship them, they'd run them down and had means of getting them out and loading them on the railroad.
So they would actually take the logs out of the river at Farmers and saw them in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
And there was a city building, and you held court as police judge in the city building. What type of cases were you hearing in the 20s? Weren't many traffic violations, were there? Weren't any cars to have?
Misdemeanors of all descriptions. Breach of peace, fight between a man and his wife.
So you got some interesting cases at that point.
Oh, yeah.
You, of course, have worked for state government for many years. In fact, you're a retired state employee. And I should let the folks know that you worked for 11 years with Morehead State University. At that point, of course, it was a college, but you headed up the power plant for the university. And what are some of the other positions you held before you retired as a state employee?
Well, the longest tenure that I had it with the Department of Agriculture.
What was your work in the Department of Agriculture?
Supervisor for Eastern Kentucky school lunch program, procurement and storage.
And then you worked with the Highway Department as well. It was called the Road Department, I guess, before the Highway Department.
It was the Road Department. I worked with the extra crews, blacktop they called them. And
But now blacktop, when did blacktop come into this country?
Oh, in the late 20s.
But when you started working with highways, or at least at the time you began, there were far more gravel roads than blacktop, of course.
Yeah. When I started, there was blacktop road from Farmers to Morehead. And during the late 20s, they paved from Olive Hill to Grayson. And from there on into Ashland was gravel road.
But in the 20s, if you were going from Morehead to Ashland, or for that matter, from Morehead back to Lexington, you were on gravel road most of the way.
Oh, yeah.
And the road department was relatively small then. In other words, you didn't have a large operation in each and every county.
Where they operate now, they have a crew in each county. Where they operate then, we started at Licking River Bridge and stopped at the Ashland city limits.
I see. You were responsible for filling chuck holes in gravel road all that way.
Cleaning the slide rock out of the ditches and keeping the culverts open.
Right. Let's talk a little more about politics, and by that I mean trying to gain votes for the candidates you're supporting in Rowan County. What are some of the ways you would work a precinct if you were trying to get your judge elected in Rowan County in the 20s and 30s?
Well, of course, you've got to, politics, to be a successful politician, you got to make a life career out of it. You can't just walk out the day before the election without you want to buy him, which was a lot of it done.
Right. We'll talk about that in a little while.
But you make a lot of friends, and I'll get 2 or 3 friends for Doc Evans, and you'll get 2 or 3 friends for Doc Evans. First thing you know, we've got a group of friends for who it might be that you voted for him because I was for him, and I voted for him because old man Jones here was for him. And
so it's really a long-term proposition of getting to know somebody, trusting them, trying to help them as you can, and then you can have some influence on their vote.
We had a county judge here that was an attorney during the 30s, John Riley. His family lived in Lexington, and I used to ask John how he come up here and was prominent in politics, and he said, I promise them anything and do nothing.
So people weren't voting on the basis of platforms back then. It was mainly just folks they knew and folks they liked.
That's a man that done something for me lately.
I see. And people vote to this day along family lines often. In other words, an entire extended family or a clan would go one way or the other. Now, I asked you earlier if the pull of the family was stronger than the pull of the party, and you tell me that there wasn't a lot of difference.
They usually voted in family line.
So to this day, you think most large families in Rowan County are in one party or the other? There's not too many families.
Our native people, I'd say that if they tell you at all, that they'd have to acknowledge that it influenced 80% of them, what my father was or my grandfather.
Right. Now, of course, you know of which
my wife was a Republican.
Right.
And
a Calvert.
I tell a story about her. Some of them ask her, how come her to be a Democrat? And I told them, Hoover Depression, the soup line.
Yeah. Well, as long as you're talking about Hoover and the Depression and Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and we've recently celebrated the 100th birthday of FDR's birth, what about the New Deal in Rowan County? This, of course, is during the 30s. Did that make a major impact on the area in terms of jobs, or was it not that sizable in Rowan County?
It was Major one program in Rowan County. It worked.
The WPA?
WPA and the PWA.
Okay, the CCC? Is that organized here?
That is one of the greatest programs that's ever been government program handed down, in my estimation.
What are some of the projects that the WPA built in this county, for example?
WPA was a program that built school building, or PWA. They built us. The WPA furnished stone, furnished the finished product, and the PWA, I think, furnished the engineering. And they built schoolhouses, one at Haldeman, one at Hogtown, one at Farmers.
They built the school directly across the street from where you were living, you tell me. And that's the school in Farmers that is still used.
Yeah.
It's interesting that all the buildings are built of native stone, so they have a distinctive look about them.
Native stone. That stone, you can see it as you go along the highway, you can see it laying in the ledges. They stripped the top dirt layer off, and they drilled with a jump drill then, one by hand, but they've got jackhammers and so forth now. And they mark out how big they wanted a block of stone, and they, every 8 or 9 inches, they drilled about 2/3 of the way through according to how thick it was. Then they had what they called plugs and feathers made out of steel. They dropped 2 feathers down in there, piece of steel, and then they drop a little plug and they go along with a hammer, and they'd hit one and hit the other one and get down to that end, and then they'd start hitting back, and they'd eventually break that thing off at a smooth angle.
Let's talk about lining up votes. Of course, a lot of votes is just because you were supporting a candidate who had a large family. You were asking for votes from people who you knew and who took your advice and rested assured that you would help them out if you got elected. But I understand that some folks expected to get a little pay for their vote in one form or another. Was this true in the 20s and 30s? Were there quite a few votes bought or offered for sale in this area?
And it's been contagious. It was, and it is.
Still folks buying and selling votes?
They don't exactly just come out and say, I'll give you $5 to vote for me, but you need to be paid for your day's work if you're going to take a day off to go vote.
And you mean that's true today?
That's true today.
Of course, back in the 20s and 30s, people were a little more straightforward, I guess, about selling their vote. Or did they talk even then in terms of a day's trouble? Or
the high-toned families.
The high-toned people described it with a little more elegance, huh? What was the going rate for a vote in cases where people expected to be paid in, say, the 30s?
$5 would buy a big one.
$5 would take care of you.
Yeah.
What percentage of people were interested in selling their vote, though, having some kind of compensation?
Oh, I'd say 6 or 8%.
But it was enough to make a difference in a county election.
Oh, yeah.
So you were really looking for situations where people would go with your candidate for a fee.
We had families in the community or in our district, voting district, that you'd have to set up with. 4 or 5 voting family. We had a certain fellow allocated to go and set up with them and take jug shine with them.
Right.
And they'd set up all night with them, and then they'd bring them, keep them together, keep somebody else from getting them.
Now, you've mentioned moonshine as a way to pay for a vote or to influence a fellow's vote. Were there a lot of votes bought or influenced with whiskey as opposed to cash money?
Well, a lot of whiskey went to that direction. I guess it influenced them.
Right. So you think more people were interested, people who were willing to sell their vote, in a fifth of moonshine than they were in even money?
That goes for the younger voter.
I see.
And the winos.
I see. Right. There's a law, of course, at this point, that no liquor store can be open on election day. Is that tied to the fact that people use liquor to get votes?
I'd say so.
But now in the 30s, of course, there was no such thing as legal liquor. So they obviously weren't using bonded liquor. What were they using?
Moonshine.
Moonshine. And where was it produced?
In about half of the barns there was in
all over this county.
All over the county. All the counties.
How would you line up moonshine before an election? Would you just put in an order with moonshiners?
Just go to fellas you know that had it, wanted to sell, and tell him to. They made about 2 or 3 grades whiskey. They made election liquor, and then they made enemies. They'd make a grade for not their friends, and then they made for the friends was good.
Well, was election liquor better than the other liquor you made?
No, it was the bottom of the totem pole.
That was the cheapest kind, just enough to get the vote and be on with it. So you think that buying votes made a big difference, or would people take a little bit of liquor or $5, vote the way they wanted to?
Well, some of the smarter ones would do that, I'd say, because we have no way of knowing.
So it's pretty much a tradition, and whether it made a big difference in an election, it's hard to even know.
If you've just been watching the paper and seeing some of these counties, Bath County and so forth, some of the high echelon of government got convicted for buying votes, just simply buying them.
So you think it persists, it's just described differently.
Yeah, that's right.
Tell me, when you were using paper ballots, I've heard of a system that was developed that surely you've had some experience with, where you didn't leave a guy on his own, you did some ballot swapping with him. Describe that to us. How did you buy a vote?
I think it originated in Happy Chandler's first election. Get her crew lined up, and we go in of a morning, send one of them in the morning, get him blank ballot off of the bulletin board outside, and he folded it up and go in and fold it up and take his ballot and stick it in his pocket and bring the sample ballot back and put it in the box and give us the blank ballot, and we give him his pay for we buy the ballot and it's not voted on.
So he'd actually go in with a marked ballot that you'd marked, and he didn't get paid until he brought his blank ballot back.
We bought the blank ballot, and then next fellow you wanted to make a deal with, he sent the blank ballot in his pocket and he'd go in, he'd take it out and put the blank ballot back in his pocket and bring us his blank ballot.
Of course, with the voting machines now, it's hard to do anything like that. You pretty much got to trust a man or look over his shoulder to help him if you're a precinct officer or whatever, I guess.
I see they've got some kind of a bill, even tightening than that up today in today's papers.
Of course, more and more, do you think folks want to vote their preference rather than thinking of any economic reward?
Well, I don't see the evidence in the election now. Of course, I'm not around them as close as I was. Not near the evidence of influencing the vote with buying.
What about the office of judge? Of course, when you were judge, this was a very powerful position. You were not only the chief administrative officer of the county, but you had judicial powers. And I guess you spent a lot of time presiding over court for any number of offenses. Do you feel that the judges really tried to interpret the statutes and lay out justice, or did they try to take a lot of personal things into consideration?
90% of the cases went through my court that was settled out of court.
You weren't what would be called a hanging judge, though, were you? I mean, you...
Well, that was my biggest drawback, sitting there and finding a man for doing something that I had done the day before myself.
So you tended to let folks off. You were somewhat merciful. You tell me that they did a survey, and what percentage convictions did you have out of people?
27.
27% of the people that came before your court were found guilty by your court.
Confessed and so forth.
What's the other county you mentioned to me?
Breathitt County.
Breathitt County, what percentage?
7.
7%. And when was this now? In the 50s?
It was sometime between 53 and 58.
But really, was it a matter of you just trying to be merciful and understanding, or did you try to be partial to folks who'd supported you in an election?
No, 90% of our cases was non-resident. We're in this cross section where the people all comes out of Indiana and Ohio and so forth. Go home on Saturday or on Friday evenings. They either get drunk to go home, and then they'll get them some moonshine to take back with them. So we had to be bothered with them both ways.
But you felt that it was better to try to be understanding and let a guy off as easy as you thought you could.
I just never could make it up in my mind that finding a man done any good.
Mm-hmm. How was patronage set up back then? Of course, one of the big things that a judge and other county officials had going for them is the influence they could have on who got jobs and who didn't have jobs. How was that handled?
Well, back during my tenure, the magistrates and me, we agreed on who would have it. I had 2 Democrat magistrates and 2 Republican magistrates to contend with. Of course, we had the majority.
And you just proceeded to give jobs to people you thought should have them, and it was your friends that you thought should have them in most cases.
I didn't give my enemies many.
Right, so when a new judge came, many of the positions turned over, particularly if it was a change of parties, I guess.
Yeah.
What about federal jobs? Were you able to influence federal jobs at all?
None whatever.
None at all, but state jobs?
Well, if I haven't picked the right governor.
So whether or not you had any influence on patronage with regard to state jobs had to do more with your friendship with the governor. What if there was, say, a Republican governor in Frankfort and a Democratic administration here, just the opposite? Would the party out of control in the county still make more decision on state jobs?
Yeah. Republicans furnished highway crews, and there had been a time that played a part in your college.
Mm-hmm. Well, you told me that there'd been a lot more politicking than people want to think about that went into even the college being located here. Tell us about Senator Allie Young. He was a very practical politician, wasn't he?
Well, a man could talk for a week about Senator. All of the old timers knows him. They say that he's the father of the Morehead College.
Mm-hmm.
And that when they was locating or getting a location for it, he was senator and he was the leader of the Senate. And all of the surrounding counties in northeastern and eastern Kentucky, I think down as far as Covington, had an application in for the location of Morehead University now.
Right.
But one county joins us to the north, and the old fellow got himself elected for representative, and when it got down to the point, he had to decide and vote, and he was a Republican. Of course, they counted on him, I suppose. Some of the boys got a hold of him and set him up, and he voted for Morehead. Went home driving a big old Cadillac and new clothes, and his wife dressed up, and the story goes that the Republicans jumped on him up there and wanted to know what he meant. He sold them out, and he said, "Oh, no more. Didn't sell you out." He said, "I sold my farm and bought that office, had to buy it to get it." And he said, "I sold it for a profit. Nothing wrong about that."
So he thought trading a farm in for a Cadillac wasn't too bad a deal. So you suggesting that folks who were instrumental in getting Morehead State University here might have had to buy a few things for a few votes.
That's told for being partly true, I think.
Right, right. Well, I would imagine that folks use their influence in a variety of ways. During the Great Depression and the time when there were New Deal jobs here, were folks changing on the basis of those jobs from the Republican Party to the Democratic Party?
I don't think down on the labor level, but I think the county judge, I don't know, wasn't instrumental in it then, but I think the county judge set up a committee, had the authority to set up, be he a Democrat or a Republican, to
decide who got the jobs.
To decide who got the jobs.
So there weren't necessarily folks changing parties, because if there had been a Republican judge, he could have a lot of influence on WPA.
Well, it was so in this county that...
Why were people changing, though, other than just the influence of individuals like you from the Republican to the Democratic Party in, say, the 30s and 40s? Was it a change in the population base or just a change in political attitudes?
Well, both. But I think our population base was based on the influx of Democrats from Morgan and Elliott and McGoffin settling in their sparsely settled big Republican precinct.
And that changed the whole character of politics here.
I told the boys when the first time it went Republican, elected the first Republican or Democratic judge. This fellow Riley, John Riley, telling you about, said some of the strong Republicans made up their mind that something bad had happened, and said that one of the Republicans said, well, he said, we're right now, he said, we had a good county, and the damn trash from Morgan and Ella come down here and tore it up.
So they didn't know if they appreciated the changeover in the voting style. Of course, this county has demonstrated throughout the decades that it can switch back and forth.
Oh, yeah.
And a lot of people look to Rowan County to see how the state's going as a whole or how the nation's going as a whole. Do you think the county...
I think the people as a whole everywhere is more liberal.
Mm-hmm.
Vote more what they believe. Mm-hmm. And maybe they found out that they can act like what they want to and then go ahead and vote anyway. But
real quickly, because we're about to run out of time, but did the traditional approach to politics and government work? Do you think we did elect good officials who served us well, or was it more just a game?
I don't know.
It's hard to know sometimes. But at least Brown County has come to where it is today, and that has to be through some wise leadership and some hard work from individuals such as you. So I want to thank you, Judge McClain. You've been the most interesting guest. 30 minutes really flies, doesn't it?
Too fast.
Right.
A whole lot of things I was going to talk about.
That's right, and we'll have you back sometime. But I want to tell all of our viewers that this is our Appalachia, and we have been with former Judge Bill McClain from Rowan County, and we've talked about a very fascinating aspect of Eastern Kentucky history and culture. Do join us again, and you come back and talk to us again, Judge. Thank you very much.